Hi, everybody. Ian Bremmer here, and a quick take to kick off your week. An extraordinary attack over the weekend by the Ukrainians against and across Russia, hitting many of their military bases, destroying strategic aircraft, including bombers used for nuclear deterrence and potentially, God forbid, attacks, and also early warning aircraft. The Ukrainians saying that they've taken out literally some dozens of aircraft. Confirmation from early satellite photos looks closer to 15, maybe 20. But nonetheless, this is an unprecedented military success by the Ukrainians in this war, and frankly, one of the most extraordinary asymmetric attacks we've ever seen in modern warfare. There are big dangers that come out of this for potential escalation. There are opportunities that come out of this as well. I want to talk about both. But let's first talk about the attack itself. When I saw it over the weekend, the first thing I thought about was Israel's strikes against Hezbollah. Hezbollah, remember, was considered sort of impregnable as this most important proxy of Iran, but also strongest army of any non-state actor in the world, and one that Israel did not want to engage in war fighting against because it would be so devastating to the Israelis. Turned out, within a matter of days, Israel was able to destroy their military infrastructure, their communications capabilities, and decapitate their leadership. So much for that, dramatically changing their ability to engage in strikes, increasing Israel's national security and defense, and weakening Iran's geopolitical position in the region. That was the first thing I thought when I saw what Ukraine was capable of doing. But of course, with Ukraine, we're talking about damage against Russia, a military major power, a nuclear superpower. And suddenly, not only is Ukraine doing significant damage to Russia's air capabilities, strike capabilities against Ukraine, which is important for them because over the next 6 months, they were otherwise running out of battery systems, ammunition for Patriot defense, and that was going to need to be replenished, and wasn't clear that there was enough to do that. So it limits Russia's capabilities there, but also this undermines Russia's nuclear deterrence. This undermines Russia's second strike capabilities. It matters for the Nordics. It matters for the United States, and certainly something Putin hadn't considered. I mean, if you think about the last 3.5 years of war, the presumption has been that Putin has time on his side, that the longer he waits and continues to grind down Ukraine, his Goliath against Ukraine's David will be able to take more territory, destroy the Ukrainian economy, destroy the Ukrainian willingness to fight, and ultimately prevail. And the United States won't want to continue to support long-term, and the Europeans will be increasingly divided, and that's the right strategy. And Putin's been unwilling to talk about a ceasefire because he doesn't think it benefits him. This has the potential to change Putin's thinking, because here we're talking about drones that Ukraine has been developing itself in its own country with support, specifically with support from a lot of ethnic Ukrainian technologists from the diaspora that have come in from the US, from Canada, from Europe, and worked to help the cause in Ukraine. But they have now built a robust, sort of top-notch drone capability. And these drones, by the way, cost about $300 to $400 each, as opposed to roughly $1 billion for a Russian advanced bomber, which they no longer have the military capability to build more. And so, I mean, you're talking about a 100,000 to 1 return on investment for the Ukrainians against Russia. And even with Yemen against the Americans, you're hard pressed to find those kinds of returns in asymmetric warfare. And that, of course, should be telling India, thinking about Pakistan, should be telling other countries around the world that, small countries with advanced technology can be a real danger to you. Should be telling Putin that the longer you fight this war, maybe you are risking your own nuclear superpower status, your own military deterrent status globally. Maybe you're risking your own survivability as leader of Russia as you show to others around the Russian power circles that your decisions to fight this war have driven Russia to an extremely vulnerable place on the regional stage, on the global stage. So that is a positive thing. And I find it very interesting that, of course, the timing of these Ukrainian strikes, literally the day before, there were going to be talks between Russia and Ukraine in Istanbul. That was not coincidental. That was the Ukrainians showing the Russians, hey, we have cards too that we are willing to play. We can hurt you, so you need to talk about a ceasefire. I think the fact that the Russians still persisted in having those conversations and talked about an all-for-all prisoner swap of prisoners that were highly injured, which is not unprecedented. There's been such exchanges consistently over the past 3.5 years. But the fact that that happened shows that there is a possibility that Russia is more willing to come to the table now. And certainly if the United States, on the back of this, were to press together with Europe and say, Russia, if you don't accept a ceasefire, like the Ukrainians are going to accept, have said they will accept without preconditions, we are prepared to hurt you a lot more. If Trump was willing to do that, there'd be a reasonable chance that Putin would accept at least a first phase 30-day ceasefire. Then you see where you get. So I think there's a possibility. There's also a possibility that Putin will see that this requires him to take the Ukrainians out with much greater urgency, to cause much more damage on them with greater urgency. They've already engaged in huge numbers of war crimes. They engage in attacks against civilians, against civilian infrastructure in a way that the Ukrainians do not. Yes, they can fire more weapons at Kiev, and that's probably what they end up doing. And they just kill a lot more Ukrainians, and a lot of things get shot down, thankfully. But it's also more plausible that Russia might think about a tactical nuclear strike. And I don't think that's likely, thankfully, but it's certainly more likely than it was on Friday. So is it 5% now? Is it 10%? It's a lot higher than we would like it to be. I think that if you're Putin, you're constrained by the fact that the Chinese, your most important strategic partner on the global stage, really opposes you doing that. But you also are emboldened by the fact that you don't believe the United States would do much to respond. You know how scared the Americans are of World War III. You know how much the Americans don't want to respond to a fight that could involve them directly as opposed to a proxy war through Ukraine, an indirect fight. And, if you're Putin, you do understand that the fact that your deterrent has not been seen as credible. So you tell the West that we're going to hit you hard if you expand NATO to include Finland and Sweden, and then you expand it and you don't do anything, you're not seen as credible. You say there's going to be hell to pay if they give weapons that are used to target inside Russia, and then they give weapons that are used to target inside Russia, and you don't do anything. So, it's also true that Putin himself hasn't been seen to have the cards to cause a real threat to NATO. And maybe that's because Putin has ultimately more self-preservation, and that's a good thing. But as he's getting more threatened, remember when Prigozhin decided to go all in against Putin, it's because he felt like he was in an unwinnable situation. He felt like no matter what he did, he was going to end up in jail or dead. And that's why he launched his mutiny against Putin. And that's why he ended up, weeks later, assassinated with some of his top folks, blown up in a private plane by the Kremlin, almost certainly. Let's say certainly, even though we don't have direct evidence. Who else could have done it? And so the equivalent of what Prigozhin did on Moscow would be Putin using a tactical nuke in Ukraine. And that feels unthinkable, but we have to at least consider what that scenario would look like and how countries would respond to it, because it's plausible. And for that reason, we should all be pressing as hard as possible to get this war to an end, not least of which because the amount of suffering that the Ukrainians continue to go through day in, day out is so unconscionable. And maybe it would be easier to do if it wasn't such a regular thing on the global stage these days, in Gaza, in Sudan, in Haiti, in the DRC, in so many places that so few countries are willing to expend real resources and political capital to bring these wars to an end. But in the case of Ukraine, as we're seeing now, the dangers are not just to the Ukrainian people. The dangers are increasingly global. So that's it for me. I hope people are paying attention, and I'll talk to you all real soon.